The arena was electric, a playoff victory that should have been remembered for resilience, grit, and triumph. But instead of celebration, what unfolded became a scandal that rocked the WNBA to its very core. Sophie Cunningham, sidelined by injury yet fiercely cheering her team, suddenly found herself face-to-face with an aggressive league security guard. The moment was captured, replayed, and spread like wildfire. An injured player in a leg brace, celebrating from the sidelines, inexplicably treated as a threat. What happened that night left fans speechless, players furious, and the league scrambling for answers it didn't have. The bizarre confrontation began quietly but escalated in seconds. Sophie, visibly unable to even step onto the hardwood, was approached by a security guard whose body language screamed hostility. They leaned in close, shouting as though she had breached protocol, even though she remained safely at the sideline. Fans who witnessed it live couldn't believe their eyes. Cameras captured every movement, every flash of Sophie's confusion and growing defiance. What should have been a scene of pure joy instantly turned into one of humiliation and accusation, orchestrated by the very league meant to protect her. This wasn't just about one heated exchange. It became a symbol of misplaced priorities, of a league that continues to fumble its biggest opportunities. Sophie Cunningham's only crime was passion, yet that passion was punished in real time on the biggest stage. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Teammates celebrating freely, Sophie being shouted down. Why her? Why in this moment? The viral video didn't just raise eyebrows. It raised a burning question that fans and analysts demanded to be answered. Was Sophie Cunningham targeted? And if so, by design? The irony was staggering. An underdog Indiana Fever team had just pulled off the unthinkable, advancing in the playoffs without their star, Caitlin Clark. The win should have dominated headlines, a rallying cry for perseverance. Instead, the spotlight shifted entirely. Social media feeds didn't lead with highlights of Lexi Ho's clutch shots or the Fever's resilience. They led with the confrontation. Sophie's bewildered face became the defining image of the night. And for the WNBA, a league desperate for positive momentum, the damage was immediate, brutal, and entirely self-inflicted. From that moment forward, the Fever's victory became an afterthought. All that anyone could talk about was the guard, the aggression, and the blatant double standard. Fans felt robbed of celebrating their team's accomplishment. Sophie was thrust unwillingly into the center of a storm she hadn't created. What had been a joyous night turned sour, remembered not for basketball, but for controversy. And this was no isolated flare-up. It was the latest in a long string of incidents where Sophie Cunningham, outspoken and unapologetic, found herself painted as a villain by the very system meant to support her. The context makes it even more absurd. Sophie wasn't even suited up to play. She stood near the half-court line with Caitlin Clark and Chloe BBY, all of them sharing the same jubilant energy. None of them crossed the boundary into the playing area. None of them interfered. Yet only Sophie was singled out. Only Sophie was deemed a problem. The optics were disastrous. Fans could see it with their own eyes. It wasn't about rule breaking. It wasn't about control. It was about something deeper, uglier, and impossible to ignore. Sophie had been marked. The guard's body language told the story. They weren't calm. They weren't professional. They were confrontational, leaning into Sophie's space as if she were hostile. The aggression was shocking, considering Sophie's visible limitation. A player bound in a leg brace could hardly sprint onto the court even if she wanted to. The disproportionate response was undeniable. Video of the altercation spread in minutes, and with every replay, the public's disbelief hardened into outrage. This was an enforcement of rules. It was humiliation, public and deliberate, against one of the league's most polarizing yet undeniably popular figures. As the video spread, fans dissected every frame. They saw Caitlin Clark clapping beside Sophie, Chloe BBY grinning at the same distance, both untouched, unbothered, yet only Sophie was confronted. The discrepancy was glaring. Comment sections became battlefields, filled with accusations of bias, hypocrisy, and double standards. Fans didn't mince words. Sophie Cunningham was being targeted, and they demanded to know why. Theories flew. Was it her outspoken nature, her defiance, her refusal to play the league's polished narrative game? Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. This wasn't random. This was intentional. The emotional roller coaster played out on Sophie's face. First came confusion, her eyes wide in disbelief. Then came indignation, The fire she's known for blazing through her expression. Her body language screamed defiance. She didn't back down. She didn't cower. Instead, she stood firm, refusing to let the confrontation diminish her spirit. Fans latched onto that image, sharing it endlessly. Sophie, unshaken in the face of unnecessary hostility, became the embodiment of resistance. To her supporters, it wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and exposing a league failing its own stars. The backlash was immediate, and it was merciless. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, every platform exploded with condemnation. The Fever's hard-fought win was buried beneath hashtags like #FreeSophie and #WNBAExposed. Clips of the confrontation garnered millions of views in hours, drowning out any celebration of Indiana's playoff advancement. Fans didn't just see a one-off mistake. They saw a pattern, a disturbing consistency in how Sophie is treated. And this time, they weren't just upset. They were furious, convinced that the WNBA had crossed a line that could not be ignored or explained away. Critics pointed out what should have been obvious. If another player had shown Sophie's level of enthusiasm, say Angel Reese or Natasha Cloud, the narrative would have been entirely different. The league would have praised their passion, celebrated their leadership, highlighted their fiery competitiveness. But for Sophie, the framing was inverted. Passion became entitlement. Enthusiasm became insubordination. Confidence became arrogance. The hypocrisy was undeniable. Fans called out in droves, shattering the league's already fragile credibility. What looked like celebration from others became criminal when it came from Sophie Cunningham. And the double standard couldn't have been more blatant. This was the irony that enraged fans most. Sophie wasn't the aggressor. She was a target. She wasn't breaking rules. She was living the moment. Yet somehow, she became the villain of the night. For years, Sophie has been cast in that role. The bad girl of the WNBA, a player whose unapologetic confidence doesn't fit the mold. Rival fan bases feed the narrative, certain media outlets amplify it. But for the league itself to enforce it through a public confrontation, that crossed a line. And fans weren't just watching. They were documenting, critiquing, and rallying in real time. The optics couldn't have been worse. A semi-final berth on the line, a monumental victory achieved. And yet the defining image wasn't Lexie Hull's heroics or the Fever's jubilation. It was Sophie Cunningham being shouted down by league security. The WNBA, a league desperately fighting for mainstream respect, had sabotaged itself in the most public way imaginable. Instead of building momentum off a triumphant playoff story, it handed critics more ammunition. The question echoing across social media was simple and damning. How can fans take this league seriously when it can't even manage its own celebrations? The narrative snowballed, fueled by one glaring fact: Sophie wasn't alone. She was celebrating shoulder to shoulder with Caitlin Clark and Chloe BBY. The three stood together, indistinguishable in their excitement. And yet, only Sophie faced confrontation. Fans pounced on comparison, circulating side-by-side clips, showing Sophie being targeted while her teammates remained untouched. It was a smoking gun, the evidence that made excuses impossible. No reasonable explanation could justify it. The league had singled her out, and once the public reached that conclusion, there was no going back. The damage was permanent, the outrage justified. The fallout reached a fever pitch. Hashtags trended, memes exploded, and the WNBA was once again accused of undermining its own growth. Fans mocked the security guard as a mall cop on a power trip, while blasting Commissioner Kathy Engelbert for presiding over what they called a clown show. It wasn't just harsh criticism, it was brutal, unrelenting, and impossible to spin. The confrontation had become bigger than Sophie, bigger than the Fever, bigger even than the playoffs. It had become a symbol of everything fans believe is broken about the WNBA's leadership priorities and credibility. What made this so damaging was the timing. The league is in a critical moment, riding the wave of Caitlin Clark's star power, finally capturing mainstream attention. Casual fans were tuning in, curious, perhaps skeptical, but open to being won over. And what did they see? Not triumph, not growth, not professionalism. They saw dysfunction. They saw a league incapable of letting its players celebrate without manufacturing controversy. In an entertainment-driven world, perception is reality, and the perception after Sophie's confrontation was catastrophic. The WNBA was a mess, more interested in control than celebration. Sophie's own response spoke volumes. She didn't scream. She didn't escalate. She stood her ground, her defiant expression saying everything that needed to be said. I will not be intimidated. Fans rallied around that strength, flooding her social media with messages of support, declaring her the heartbeat of the Fever's emotional core. Every time Sophie is targeted, her fan base grows stronger, more loyal, more defiant. The WNBA may think it's diminishing her by policing her passion, but in reality, it's fueling a movement, one that sees Sophie Cunningham as both hero and victim of a broken system. The bigger picture is grim. Sophie isn't the only star mishandled by the league. Caitlin Clark has endured unpunished physicality all season. Lexi Hull's heroics remain overlooked, and countless players struggle under inconsistent standards. The WNBA talks growth, markets parity, but plays favorites behind the scenes. Players who fit the mold get elevated. Those who challenge authority get punished. Fans see it. They call it out. And with every incident, every double standard, their patience runs thinner. Sophie's confrontation wasn't just a mistake. It was evidence of a systemic failure fans already suspected. Now it was undeniable. The outrage wasn't fading. If anything, it grew. Every clip, every meme, every breakdown of the video reignited the fire. Fans demanded accountability, even calling for Engelbert's resignation. They mocked the idea that the WNBA could ever be taken seriously, while it allowed such dysfunction. To them, Sophie Cunningham's treatment was the clearest proof yet. This league doesn't protect its stars. It undermines them. It doesn't celebrate passion. It polices it. And in a sports world where narratives drive growth, that's not just bad strategy, it's suicidal. Fans weren't buying excuses anymore. They had made their verdict clear. Sophie Cunningham has always been polarizing, a lightning rod for attention. But now, she has become something more, a symbol of defiance. She is not the carefully marketed Paige Buchers or the media darling Angel Reese. She is Sophie, fiery, outspoken, and unwilling to bend. The league may see her as a problem, but fans see her as the truth. Every confrontation, every attempt to silence her, only amplifies her voice. And in that defiance lies the league's greatest irony. The very player it seems determined to suppress is the one drawing more eyes, more passion, more loyalty. As the dust settles, one fact remains undeniable. This was supposed to be a celebration. The Fever's playoff run should have united fans, players, and the league in joy. Instead, it became a cautionary tale of self-sabotage. The defining image wasn't victory, but controversy, not triumph, but humiliation. And at the center of it all stood Sophie Cunningham, wronged yet unbroken, silenced yet louder than ever. The WNBA wanted control. What it got instead was chaos, backlash, and the empowerment of a fan base unwilling to let this injustice fade quietly into the night. And so the story lingers, long after the final buzzer. Fans replay the clip, share the memes, debate the meaning. But beneath the noise lies a truth too sharp to ignore. Sophie Cunningham was targeted, an injured player, treated like a criminal for celebrating her team's win. In that moment, the WNBA didn't just embarrass Sophie, it embarrassed itself. And until accountability is demanded, until change is embraced, the question will remain, echoing across arenas and timelines alike. How can a league so determined to silence its stars ever hope to truly grow?